is really intended to be a bit of a review of the basic so which relate around communication skills, because when it boils down to it, that's what we do.
Yeah.
Take communication.
Simply.
Simply, yeah. If people were able to communicate, they just wouldn't need us there at all. Yeah. So what we're looking at is the communication skills. So in the qualification, the graduate diploma, it identifies these communication skills as competencies that you need to have as a practitioner. So the things that we're looking for, you know, and helping you to develop in this context, you know, they're not things that you've probably not come across before. The main thing is making sure that you are using them in this context. So establishing rapport and mirroring. So using in a lot of cases non-verbal rapport building skills, because we, as a mediator, we can't use that rapport building that you often use in general thing of finding things that make us like the other person. Because if you're sharing anecdotes and, oh yes, I really like that team as well, or whatever, it doesn't work as a mediator. Because the other person's sort of saying, oh, that looks very you know, very similar. Non-judgmental language is a skill that's probably should be shared a bit more with some other professional roles, maybe more than it is, but definitely something that we need to be very mindful of. And one of the things we'll look at is what is exactly non-judgmental language. Displaying empathy, and empathy isn't sympathy. There's a real distinction that sometimes isn't made. Demonstrating and encouraging active listening and questioning. So that's a really big one in mediation. Making sure that we are actually hearing what's intended to be communicated, rather than just hearing what we've heard, because that's, again, a difference. So that's asking clarifying questions, not just reacting or responding, but clarifying first. So it's kind of a two-step process in a lot of ways. The clarifying information and assumption, so it fits in very well with active listening, but it's it sort of goes a bit beyond that into, you know, are we hearing an agreement here or not? You know, is what's being said clearly understood by everybody? Speaking clearly, simply, and effectively. So, as a mediator, we need to make sure we're pitching our language to the level of the participants. You know, we don't want to be showing how smart we are by using language that it's, you know, might intimidate or be unclear for people. So nice and simply and clear, and making sure people understand. Showing respect for individual difference. So this one can be quite challenging, and it comes into that area of unconscious bias, where we have to be very mindful that different to us is not wrong, because that's the challenge that can happen if we're not very conscious.
Sorry. Can't hear you at the moment, Joanne. Now?
Okay, what about now?
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
I've decided to do a bad thing. So that respect for individual difference, reframing, respectful interruption, which is another skill that isn't sometimes thought as being a skill, but yeah, we need to be able to stop people, redirect them, reframe them, and shift them out of their stories, because people get really good at their stories when they're in conflict, because they tell them a lot of times. They're as practiced at their stories as any stage performer ever was. And that's not saying that they're lying. It's just saying that they're they're telling the story so many times that it takes on its own life. Hey, Ken. Hey. And
Hi,
can you
Ken.
hear us? No?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, we
Yes.
can. Yes.
Cool.
The final one is transition statements. So, look, we might we'll sort of go through. I don't want to go through things that you already know and are comfortable with. So, but I guess maybe the best thing is to just talk a little bit about the why, and then we'll flick through quickly if we think so. Why is establishing rapport so important? So these are kind of the top things that I thought of, but can you think of any other reasons? And don't worry, the presentation's available in the files area. So, ultimately rapport, if you're in rapport with someone, you feel comfortable with them. If you're out of rapport, you feel uncomfortable. You don't necessarily know why, but and the other thing with if you're out of rapport, so with mediation, some of the things we do to create rapport is we sit around the table. The mediator's not standing and the party's sitting. When you do property mediation, if you're going to be using a board, you'll find that does take you out of rapport. So you have to be really mindful. I've had a situation where, the minute you sort of get up and you're away, they start bickering and mucking up. I've had situations where I've left the board and I've gone and sat down and re-established rapport, and then reminded them about the ground rules rather than do it from the teacher position. So you've got to be mindful of that. It's a lot easier to manage the room if you're in rapport with the people than if you're not. The other good thing is it helps you to, I mean, we do rapport naturally. It's a skill we've got, unless we've got very low emotional intelligence, and then we mightn't have developed that skill much. So the beauty of it is it helps us to tell when, if something's been said that shocks someone or causes them to break. We'll feel it. You feel in your body that someone's gone out of rapport with you. And so that gives you a chance to say, oh, okay, what happened there? Lets you back up, lets you, check in, all of those things. So it's really powerful for you to sort of do those multiple things at once of keeping track of the people and moving things forward. It makes makes it possible to ask difficult questions. So I'm sure you've all been in situations where you've had someone who wasn't in rapport with you, who didn't, and they've asked you questions that made you feel really uncomfortable. Yeah. And we don't want to be the person making people feel really uncomfortable. We need to be the person that's making this place safe and comfortable for people. Yeah, and I'm not. So I'm an NLP, and so is Ken. I'm an NLP master practitioner, and a lot of the original work on rapport came out of the NLP modelling, and they Bandler and Grinder, Richard Brandrew in his book Frogs into Princess Prince's wrote that, rapport means that you really demonstrate you understand the other person's model of the world. So it's very important. So, it's about that in sync. And you can see people walking down the street, whether or not they're in rapport. They can see, you often see it, two people that they're really mismatching. If you don't observe this, just watch. Next time you're out in a public place, just watch the people that are in rapport and the people that are walking out of sync. They will tell you there's something going on in that that relationship. They're not syncing up. So mirroring is a we can get into rhythm with another person. So you can do it deliberately by choosing to adjust your tone and your body language and your pacing and all of those things, just to be a little bit more like the people. Often in that first part of the mediation, when you're asking each person to speak just to you, that can be a time where you really get out of rapport with the other person. And so what you can do is, while you're engaging with one, you can maybe get your body language in rapport with the other person. So maybe lean a little bit more towards the one that's not speaking, or, sit in a very similar way to the one who's not speaking. And so that kind of gives them an unconscious feeling that you're with them still, rather than just leaning over and being totally engaged with the person you're speaking with, and that other one's just like, I don't matter. So just be mindful of those things. It's different a little bit when you're online, but you'll be meeting people, you'll be working with people face to face as well. But even online, we need to be mindful, just checking in on the other person, looking towards them as well. And so yeah, I talked about those things. Any comments or questions or anything around rapport?
No, that all makes sense. Yes.
Yeah, cool.
I think it's a real skill, though. I'm still learning it, to be honest with you.
Sorry, Matt, could you just say that again?
I think it's a real skill, and I'm still learning it.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, absolutely. We always are, and it's just surfacing every now and again to just take stock. I think that's what I tend to do. You don't have to do it consciously if you're doing it, if you know what I mean. So once you practice, you will fall into it automatically. The people that are in sync walking down the street aren't doing that on purpose. Unless there's might be a practitioner that's trying to make their other person feel comfortable. Generally, it'll be just, yeah. So it's really just checking. Am I in rapport with this? Is someone feel, does it feel uncomfortable for me to be with that other person? In that case, it's probably feeling uncomfortable for them as well. So, just checking, it's good because we can check in with ourselves, because this is kind of an inbuilt system we've got. So it's helpful in that way. The next thing is, why shouldn't we use judgment? Sorry, Ken, did you have a...
Yeah, I just got to make a comment if I could. That,
yes, absolutely.
With rapport, it's easier to build trust.
Yeah.
If you don't have rapport with a person, building trust is not impossible. And we've got trying to get these parties in a mediation to trust us and to have faith in the system. And without the rapport, it's very hard to get them to do that.
Yeah, so for example, I was setting up my office, and the boys who were all lawyers, they wanted to have a square desk in there. So they said, oh, you can sit on that side and they can sit on the other side. And nah, I want this round table. Want the round one, please. And so we don't have that positional thing. So, not always possible, but, even being mindful of what does the way you set up your room say to people? You know, is it making them unconsciously feel like they're at the schoolmaster's, you know, headmaster's office or something? Or, you know, because mediation, even though it's a structured process, it is an informal process, and it can, you know, it doesn't have to be overly formal. Yeah, so thank you for that, Ken. Yeah. So be curious, not judgmental. And that's the distinction. We can ask people anything we like with a attitude of curiosity, but if they feel like you're judging them and you're asking leading questions and you're asking questions to try and prove how stupid they are, or, you know, like, what were you thinking type questions, people know, you know. So you actually genuinely have to have an attitude of curiosity. It's not, you know, it's not faking it. It's actually, you know, why, I'm curious, you know, what outcome were you hoping for? You know, what did you think would happen there? You know, but not what did you think would happen if you did that? You know, it's, you know, what genuinely, what, you know, I want to know what you were hoping might happen when you, you know, slammed on the door with the hammer, you know, or whatever. You know, it's so we don't want to use judgmental language because it shuts people down. You know, we all know when we're feeling judged, we're not going to take a risk. We don't feel trusted. We don't feel like it's safe for us to be experimenting or coming up with ideas. It can invalidate something that's perfectly legitimate. You know, within a perfectly normal and acceptable range. If we appear to be judgmental about it, it'll, you know, it might stop something that shouldn't have been stopped. Certainly can favour one person over another, so it can definitely give a perception of bias, or it might actually be bias. And it certainly will intimidate people who lack confidence. So if you've got someone who's got a very avoidant style, or who's very accommodating, so, you know, from that table we've got about styles, conflict styles. If you've got someone like that and you're the slightest bit judgmental, they will pull their little feelers back into their shell and stop volunteering things. So what is judgmental language? So it's anything that's directed in a personal way about their behaviour, life choices, attitudes, or whatever. So getting that I language out, and I know if you've done any counselling, they're all about I language, not as a mediator. We don't want to know what you think, because what you think is your judgment. Don't want to know it. You know, it's you know, unless it's, you know, I think it's time we had a break. Okay, I'll let you away with that. So you're allowed, I'll let you say I think about things like process things, but not about content, because it really, so when people are making judgments, they cite vague authorities, you know, everyone, or, you know, it's said, the experts, you know, anyone that's going to say, you know, you're wrong. So it doesn't help whether it's any of the shoulds or musts, you know. So if you find yourself shoulding people, but also if you hear the other person shoulding them. Now, shoulding's a technical term for using should too much, because, you know, if you say you should, it means what I'm telling you, I have authority over you. I'm you know, I'm superior to you. And if you hear someone saying I should, then you know that they're putting themselves down, and they're, you know, they're putting themselves lower. So should's quite a really important word to be listening for. And something else that sometimes mediators do, which can be quite problematic, is they really overly push the benefits of mediation over the alternatives. So the WATNA's, the worst alternative to a negotiated agreement. sometimes what's being offered in the mediation isn't as good, it isn't a good solution. It might be a compromise that's just not a good solution. So if someone's really worried about accepting something, and we get all hung out, if you go to court, it'll cost you all this money and it'll take it can, we can find that we're getting judgmental. We're pushing our desire to get these people resolved. And heaven forbid if you start thinking and keeping track of your settlement rate, you'll find that you're doing that much more than you should, because ultimately, and the settlement rate from mediation is very high. It depends, but it's probably around the 80, 85, 90, depending on styles and approaches. But that's not necessarily in the mediation session. Often people need to go away, reflect, think about it, maybe make a minor adjustment to do something, and then they'll settle. So, it really isn't life or death whether they make that final settlement agreement in your mediation session. If you've been able to progress them and get them talking, there's a very good chance that they will reach a resolution. So, but I have talked to a number of mediators who get really caught up on that. It's desperately has to be resolved here in this mediation, or it's the monsters will get them. It's and that's black and white thinking, and we don't do that. So how do we avoid judgmental language? So don't use I statements. Be careful inserting your meaning. So when you're inserting your meaning, it's when you're using because or so or that, you need to do this because, you're kind of putting that your values in. And be careful with those words like obviously, clearly, because they can shut people down. And it's such, they're small words, and you're going to use them, but just be listening for yourself using them. Because when you say obviously to someone, it means they can't say, well, I don't understand, or, so if they're a strong person, they will, but if they're not feeling strong, they'll stay quiet, and they've missed something. And that's, that's contrary to your role and what you're trying to. So, better language is, correct me if I'm wrong, it appears, it sounds like, so in a way we actually deliberately use quite wussy language so that it makes it really easy for people to say, no, that's not what I meant. Because if you say, obviously you both, blah, or, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like, which one is easier to, to respond to? Definitely the second one, isn't it? So, do clarify their words. So you can, you said blah. Is that what you mean? Or, it sounds like, those sort of things. So rather than, I think that, what you said isn't really, appropriate way to behave. You definitely wouldn't be saying that. Avoid sympathy. So I talked before about empathy, but sympathy is the I'm sorry, that sort of thing. Because for one, if you say I'm so sorry, it means that what you've told me is true, and I've gone into that. It's much better to say, look, it looks like you're feeling upset about that. It looks like that's really upsetting. You're acknowledging the emotion. You're not brushing it over, but you're not buying into it. So that the other person, because remember, most of the time we got two people there. And so if you're saying you're sorry to the one for something the other one's done, what does that do to the dynamic? And then clarifying motivations, so what were you hoping to achieve? So we want to do that. So what have I done? So if you just say why'd you do that? It can sound quite judgmental. I'm sure you've been in situations where someone said, why did you do that? What? So, or you can use consequential language. So, I just told her what for because, she was being an idiot. Oh, okay, and what happened then? Well, then she called the police. Yeah, so it's sort of, oh, okay, so how did that work out for you?
Yeah.
Or, so it's sometimes we can just ask, so what happened then? What happened next in the sequence? Just draw out the story. And never assume. Always ask the clarifying questions. Use your summaries to check that you're understanding. Because remember, you come from a different background, worldview. A lot of the emotive words that people will use have different meaning for you than they do for them. Our language isn't as standardized as we might think. And encourage them to do the same. So the more of that you do, the more they'll learn to do it, and the more they'll the easier it is for them to respond rather than react. Any questions about or comments about judgmental language?
I'd like to throw in about obvious if I could.
Oh, yes. Yep.
If you do use the word, that's obviously whatever. And if it's not obvious to one of the parties, then you're basically calling them dumb.
Mm.
That's the way they'll take it. Like, what do you mean it's obvious? I don't see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So my challenge to you tomorrow is when you're out just interacting, pay attention to your language and just see how judgmental you can be. And Matt's got a monitor there, which is brilliant because your partner can give you feedback.
I'll do that, and obviously I'll be happy.
Yep. That's right. That's perfect. So empathy, so empathy is an essential component of rapport. So, you can't be in rapport with someone if they express emotion or they express something and you just, you'll flatline it. That's going to break rapport instantly. Because then they know you're not actually listening to them. You're not giving them any basic human connection. It demonstrates your ability to understand and share feelings of someone else. It helps you to be sensitive to hot buttons and emotional triggers. Helps build a mutual understanding. Empathy is an important part of interpersonal communication. So the quote, which might be a bit hard to see with my display, is when we show deep empathy towards others, their defensive energy goes down and positive energy replaces it. That's when you can get more creative in problem solving. That's a Stephen Covey quote. But ultimately, if we can display empathy, if we can get the parties to display empathy, we've done, our job's sort of done. Because they'll switch, they'll get on the same side to resolve the problems that they've got rather than be fighting each other. So empathy is really important. So there's a link here to a video, a really nice little YouTube video on the science behind empathy and the mirror neurons, which is quite a relatively new understanding that we have. Like, we've known about empathy for a long time, but now that we've got functional MRI, we can actually, they know why that works. So it's the ability to feel what someone else is feeling or understanding their thinking from their perspective. So it's walking in someone else's shoes. So the link, I can't copy link. Oh, yes, I can. I'll put it in the chat box. So if you, I'd really encourage you to have a look at, oh no, it didn't link it. Oh, well, look, if you just search mirror neurons, you'll find it. But yeah, so are you all, like, you've all seen the research and that on mirror neurons? So the problem for children or people that have grown up in very distant or environments where they didn't have good attachment with a caregiver, their mirror neurons don't really develop in a healthy way. So they often lack empathy. They can't. They don't feel what other people are feeling, so they might be disdainful or indifferent. They frequently misunderstand. And so it's kind of like they've got a very granular view on emotions. So, yeah.
Autism spectrum disorder is
absolutely. Yeah.
Perfect example.
Absolutely, yeah. So they can come across as unfeeling. They often aren't unfeeling in themselves, so they might feel very deeply, but they don't necessarily connect to other people's feelings. And that's part of that, that disorder and that spectrum. So and part of our role. So if we do have people like that, we have to verbalise the emotions because they can't recognise them. So we have to give them shorthand. So we have to kind of give them crib notes, I suppose you could think of it that way. So so do acknowledge strong emotions, but not necessarily naming it. We need to be asking people what they're feeling, because the same thing, we're not, if you've ever done those little tests where they show you the person's face and you've got to say what type of emotion it is, I think I'm pretty empathetic, but I don't do that great with those tests. It's like, are they angry or is it something else? So, ask people, what do you feel about that? You seem upset. Can you tell me what you're feeling? It's more respectful anyway. You seem upset. Can you tell Matt what you're feeling? Tell the other person once you get into the body of the thing. Check if they need a break. So if if you can see or feel that someone's upset, check in. Do you need some time? So the don'ts about empathy is don't assume that you know what they're feeling. Don't fall into sympathy. And don't allow, and I've used quite an emotive language here, emotional vampires, to abuse your process. Because some people make a business out of using their emotions to manage other people. They do. They've learned early in life that it works, and it does. People that are willing to use extreme emotions can manipulate the situation. So, so either, on either extreme, some use it to try and play the victim, some use it to be aggressive and frighten others into behaving. So we want to acknowledge emotions, offer a break if they need to calm down, but don't allow them to use their emotions to deflect things they don't want to talk about, because you will find that happens. And if you're keeping an eye, it's sometimes it's genuine emotion, but sometimes it's if it starts coming up every time about that topic, it's okay, come on. But we still need to be empathetic with them and acknowledge it, and ultimately they have a right not to not to touch something if they don't, they're not willing to. Does that make sense?
That's a good explanation.
Yeah. Thank you. Active listening, one of our favourites, isn't it? Oh, Ken, did you have anything else about the where have I gone? The empathy. Yeah.
No, I didn't. Sorry, I was miles away from the computer when you asked me.
Oh, no, that's no worries. I'm just making sure you get your steps up, Ken.
That's cool.
So, according to Stephen Covey, again, I like his work, most people do not listen with the intent to understand, they listen with the intent to reply. And that's part of our job. An important part of our job is to stop that, break that cycle, get the understanding first, then get the response, because otherwise people aren't really listening. They stop listening as soon as they start formulating their reply. So active listening is really important. If nothing else, just practice that. You know, it builds trust. When people know that you're really listening, that you're wanting to clarify. We need to actively listen in order to really get down to interests. If we just allow ourselves to work with the superficial things that people volunteer, you know, most people don't feel safe enough right at the beginning of a mediation to talk about what's really important. So you need to give, you know, we need to go a little bit below that. We need to, you know, we want to uncover the interests, and it gives time to really understand what's being said. And from the work that we've been doing with Bill Eddy, one of the tools he recommends, particularly with high conflict people, is an acronym EAR, which I've got around the wrong way: empathy, attention, respect. So, you know, you've got to show people empathy, attention, respect, particularly if they're high conflict, particularly if they're upset. So I can see you're upset. I really want to understand what's important to you. Can you explain a little bit more about that? A statement like that will calm someone down and help them to tell you what it is that's upsetting them. But if you just say, look, you know the ground rules, we're not going to have any of that. It's not going to work, because they're going to, you know, they might shut up, but they're going to disengage, or they might test you depending on their nature, to see if they can, you know, win over. But if you show them empathy, I can see this is really upsetting for you, or it's really important, you know, that you get your thing. You know, I want to understand. You know, I want to help to make sure that it's really clear, and you know, it's important. So, you know, basically active listening is listening to understand before you respond. So we should be doing it really actively during the opening statements from the parties, demonstrating, like really, like you were I guess thinking of yourself, if you were a trainer in industry, you're really demonstrating for a new learner. So the parties are probably, even if they know how to do this when they're not in conflict, at the moment they've forgotten. I can promise you, because it's just what the conflict does to us. So in a way, you're kind of teaching them by the way you do it. So you know, you can be really quite overt. You know, with attention, non-verbal encouragement, eye contact if it's appropriate. Just be mindful of any cultural issues around eye contact, because that can be quite intimidating or disrespectful in some, you know, in some cultures. So, you know, it's when you're doing an intake with someone, you know, you might ask, you know, if they've got it, well, you really should ask everyone, are there any cultural or other things that I need to know of? Just ask people. That's, you know, they'll tell you. You know, but and have your listening face on. You have to be, and check your listening face, because sometimes people have got a listening face that looks really grumpy, or or really, yeah. A certain man that I'm married to has one of those. And yeah, it can be quite intimidating when he's actually just intensely listening. So have to be careful.
Check your listening face.
Yeah, check your listening face.
You are recording this, aren't you? You are recording this.
I am. He can take it. So yeah, asking questions to clarify meaning, emotion, and concepts. You know, validate this emotions without aligning. Paraphrase, just so putting it into your words. So to see that, you know, that you're understanding if it's your time, and if it's during the exploration, then getting the other party to paraphrase. So I remember once, actually I had a role play the other day, and I came up with a metaphor for sometimes we get a little bit too over involved during the exploration phase, and think of it like a tennis match and you're the ball boy. Okay, so often at the start they hit the net a lot. So your job is to grab the ball, get it to the other person, not to grab the ball and play with it for a while. So you got to think, if you're making a couple of sentences or whatever, you started playing with the ball, and then you can get on a roll, and you know, blah 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 blah. No, get it to the other person. So what did you hear there? Or, you know, whatever, one of those little, you know, can you tell thing, can you respond to what they've said? So, you know, all those little ticks, those are your ways of getting it to the other person so they can get it back over the net. So just bear that in mind if you hear yourself starting to hold the conversation. Oh no, I'm playing with the ball, quick. So yeah, and you know, let go of your own agenda. You're not there to persuade anyone of anything. It's not your role.
That's a really good example, though.
Yeah. Yeah, I was really happy with that when I came up with it. I need to find someone who can make me a cartoon about it, because it does get in your head. You think, oh, okay, yeah, because after that I can, yeah, when I'm assessing, I can see when someone's playing with the ball now. Get it back to the party.
Yes.
It's their tennis match, not yours. You're just the ball boy or ball girl. So active listening. So what we do give them time and space to speak. You know, silence. Give them time to think. You know, this is really hard work they're doing. You know, so sometimes they need a moment or two to gather their thoughts. So we can use non-verbal, you know, let them know that we're still there with them, but give them the time if they are a person that needs, you know, that's a slow speaker, you know, that needs time to think. Don't stop them, but, you know, we want to ask clarifying questions, we want to acknowledge, but we don't want to be the roadblock. Also, do stop them and slow them down, because you'll get the other person who want to do 10 different topics in one go. You know, they verbal diarrhea. They're just blah 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 blah. Okay, let me stop you there. I made a note, but I really want to go back to that first thing you said. Can you just clarify that? And you know, often you'll need to, because people they'll roll over the top of an agreement, they'll roll over the top of anything if they're, you know, if that's their communication style. Focus on understanding. It's not about persuading. And the same thing with the parties, because their natural instinct is going to be to put up an argument to what they hear. They can do that, but first thing they need to do is show that they've actually heard what was tried to be said. So, you know, it's kind of 2 steps, and they won't like it at first, but they'll get the hang of it, because it's too, yeah. And you know, we've got to encourage them. So don't talk too much. You know, your questions aren't for you to expand; they're just to clarify. You know, avoid those opinions and evaluations. It's just, is this what you mean? That's what we need to get. Don't let them ramble on. As soon as something's known, you know, that's enough. Yeah, we're not going to try and convince them of anything. And yeah, so pretty much repetitive of the same thing. But yeah, so active listening. You've done it, Erin, in your mediation training, and Matt. And Lee, I know you're lurking in the background there somewhere. Type in if you can. But yeah, it's really one of our very important skills to demonstrate and encourage active listening, and which flows into clarifying information and assumption. So all of these things are connected. It's like if you were chopping up a mediation, it'd be very hard to work out where the dividing lines are on some of these things. But, you know, we want to, often we need to do the clarifying because the parties may fear, they don't want to look foolish. And so they mightn't ask things that they should. They'll often have assumptions there. They both think that they know the reality of something, and, you know, they'll have completely different views of the thing. Sometimes it'll be an absolute mistake. Sometimes it's just a different perspective. And you know, and they'll usually have made incorrect assumptions about the other person's motivations. So those questions about what we are hoping to achieve will often really surprise the other person, because they'll have some horrible, dastardly motivation for what they were trying to achieve. And when they hear someone genuinely say something that wasn't horrible and nasty, it can often shift their perspective. But yeah, so, you know, clearing up assumptions, it's really important. Yeah, and you know, unless, if there are, you know, there will be some objective facts that need to be cleared up, otherwise people won't, you know, they won't get to a sustainable agreement. They might get an agreement, but it probably won't last. Yeah, and you know, so this quote, in case you can't read it, if we're honest with ourselves, we have to admit that sometimes our assumptions and preconceived notions are wrong, and therefore our interpretations of events are incorrect. This causes us to overreact, to take things personally, and to judge the other person unfairly. And the problem with, often by the time you get to the conflict, the person who's made these incorrect assumptions has had all these people supporting their version of events, and you know, just reinforcing those assumptions. So we get to unpack those a bit. So, you know, the wonderful who, what, where, how, why questions that that we use. So all of those, and they're not judgmental. They're just, you know, just asking for the details. How did that happen? What happened then? You know, when, particularly if you're feeling confused. So anytime you're feeling confused, definitely ask them. Don't think, oh, well, I wasn't there, they know everything that happened, because it's if it's confusing, it probably there's an assumption or a miscommunication hiding in there. Sometimes there's an expert or opinion advice needed. So certainly in family law mediation, you know, somebody will have an assumption about what is and isn't possible. It might be assumptions about borrowing capacity. It might be assumptions about tax implications if it's property. It might be assumptions about what's best for the child. You know, all sorts of things that people will be really convinced about that may not actually have much factual evidence, you know, factual thing behind them. Identify when evidence is needed, use referrals, use, you know, how do you know that? You know, those sort of questions. We need to identify the difference between subjective and objective. So, you know, objective, it's raining. Subjective is, I love raining days. You know, someone else's subjective view of raining is, I hate the rain, or it's, you know, the window of my car won't get up and my seat's going to get wet. You know, who knows what their meaning for rain is. But the objective thing is, it's raining or it's not raining. You know, or it might be raining a little bit, but then you've got degrees. So you know what I mean? It's pulling those things apart. So, you know, it's raining. So what does that mean to you? Or whatever it was that they're looking at. So clarifying information. So ask questions with the intent to clarify. Admit when you don't understand, because others are probably feeling the same and just not wanting to say it. Don't do pretend to not understand. So if you think that you're hearing, you know, there's missing information, just act as if do put on your Columbo hat and coat. It was a in the ancient days, a detective who acted really, really dumb, and asked all these questions, and then he'd come out with the solution for the crime. So just don't be worried about pretending that you don't understand if you you think that they're missing the point. Encourage them to use their active listening and all of those skills, asking them to paraphrase, what did you hear there? So, we can often hear, because it's not our problem, we're not emotionally involved, where there's a mismatch in the facts. So that's an important part of what we're doing. And once again, quotes, valuations, bank statements. Sometimes the information sometimes people are lying, and asking for clarification can bring that to the surface. And the don'ts are, don't remain silent if you're confused or if you think they're confused. That's your job to clarify things. Don't, anytime you're thinking in your mind, obviously, that dreadful word, make sure, because that's probably telling you that you've got an assumption creeping in. Because we come with the same equipment as the parties, and we're just as liable to confirmation bias and all of those little brain shortcuts that they do on us and trick us. So we need to be really mindful. Once again, goes back into the same thing. Don't make yourself hard to correct. So it's no good you saying, this is what I'm hearing, if it make, they can't, no, you're not right, but I can't say it. Don't interrogate them. You're not looking for lies, even though you're seeking to clarify any misunderstandings. If you come from that place, it's going to be much less aggressive. And it's the same. So it's any sort of thoughts about clarifying information, assumptions, any experiences that you've had?
No. Yeah,
Often a good little thing is, if people are getting upset about, if you've got people actually accusing each other of lying or whatever, I'll often use the coffee cup on the table, and I'll have it so one person, what do you see? Well, it's a cup. Has it got a handle? Well, no. And the other person on the other thing, what do you see? And you do that, and they immediately think, oh, okay, right. Because, your perspective.
Can I come in?
Yep.
I do something, you might be interested in this. I got a little toy from the National Geographic shop. It's $10.
Yeah.
And it's a hologram. And basically, it's like a black saucer. The base inside is a mirror. The black saucer goes over the top. And you put a red ball, there's like a hole in the saucer, and you drop a red ball through the hole.
Yeah.
It touches the mirror, and guess what it does? It projects a red ball into the air.
Nice.
But you have to be sitting in a certain position to see the red ball.
Okay.
So
yeah.
one person can see the red ball and the other person can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the coffee cup. It's the coffee
Yep.
cup.
Absolutely. It's beautiful. So yeah, that's the thing, something that just gets through to people about perspective.
Absolutely.
And then, I'm not saying, I'm not saying that either of you aren't telling the truth as far as you know it, but you may, sometimes these things, these misunderstandings happen because you don't have the same perspective.
It's their reality, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I use the 6 and 9 for that.
Yeah, the 6 and 9 is perfect. Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Yep. Just, draw them on a piece of paper. What's that? A 6 or a 9? 9, 6.
Absolutely.
So they're
Easy,
both
easy.
telling the truth,
Yep.
but they're contradicting each other.
Yeah. 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 So these little things, just have them up your sleeve when you need them. And then you can pull them out. So when you see that people are, you know, they're stuck from their perspective, it just helps them to understand. So this one's pretty obvious, but you know, I go again. But people won't tell you if they don't understand. Sometimes they'll tell you that they understand when they don't, and that's particularly common in certain cultures where they, you know, it's just really incredibly painful for them to contradict someone who's in a position of authority. You know, the meaning of the communication is the response that you get. So you need to be calibrating on how are they reacting to what you've said. Building, you know, using language similar to theirs builds trust and rapport. You know, I'm not saying if they're a swearer that you're necessarily going to start swearing, but you know, you can match a little bit more than you might necessarily need. Yeah, and you know, unless people fully understand what's happening, mediation can be abusive. If you've got someone there who's being pushed towards an agreement and they don't understand what's happening, that's not appropriate. You know, that you might have incorrectly screened and thought that they understood more than they did, which can happen. You know, their lack of understanding. So, you know, they might have needed a support person or an interpreter there. And so you need to think, you know, should I be proceeding with this, or should we call an end to this and you know, get some more support for them? Yeah. So we need to be quite mindful of that. You know, it's a bit of a pain working with interpreters, but it's much worse for the person who's in this process making really important decisions about their children and their money, and they don't understand really what's happening. So I know you definitely don't want to be doing that sort of thing. So yeah, so it's, you know, it's pretty obvious. It's about getting your meaning across. The only way to know is to calibrate the responses, and that's, you know, you might, if you've got doubts, you might have to ask people to paraphrase what they've heard. And this is, you know, this is quite common as well if people are really upset. So it mightn't be that they don't speak English. It's just that they're so upset they're not hearing. They're just not hearing what you're saying, and so you have, you know, all what's being said to them. So you have to slow it right down and make sure that they are. So yeah, so consider the words that that are likely to be difficult or ambiguous, and just watch your vocabulary. Check in with your listeners. Careful with jargon. We've got lots of jargon as mediators. Look, I've got one just here. I've got colds. What do you mean I've got a cold? No, I'm not. I'm not sick. Okay. Yeah, use visuals and other tools. So this is underused in mediation, but we could be doing a lot more with using diagrams and things like that to help people understand concepts and things. So pictures, you know, process maps. So rather than you know, these are all the steps, you have a diagram. This is the mediation. This is what we're going to do. That's going to be a lot more understandable for someone than you know, a lot of either spoken or written words. Use repetition. That's why we use so much repetition in mediation, because we know already that people are not, you know, they're going to be in a heightened emotional state. Their ability to take in and remember information is impaired, most likely. So that's why we you know, in the pre-mediation, we go through what's going to happen, and then at the start of the mediation, what's going to happen, and at the start of each section, what's going to happen, so that people are feeling that they know what's going to happen. Then still they get confused. So, you know, what we not trying to do is look smart. We want to be smart. So don't think that your language is going to prove that. Don't forget to check in with people softly and you know, in a way that allows them to say if they're not understanding. And don't flood them with too much. particularly if we've got a feeling that their comprehension's impeded. So it's the stopping. Do you agree? So when you're going through your opening statements, check in. What do you understand for that? Do you have any questions about that? Or do you think you? So being very mindful, and don't forget to repeat yourself a lot. It's annoying for us because we've done, after a while you've done so many times, you just want to skip over it. And I know you've been in situations where people are asking you to make important decisions and they don't want you to read the contract. They just want you to, they've done it so many times, they're bored with it, but you're just like, oh, what am I, just sign here. Yeah. So why is respect, show respect for individual differences. One of the very fundamental concepts of mediation is self-determination. So this is one of our principles, that mediation is a process of client self-determination. So unless we respect individual differences, we're going to be infringing on that. You need it to be non-judgmental. Negotiating acceptance of difference is part of the purpose, particularly in parenting, because these people will have differences in their ideas about how children should be raised that are within the realm of acceptable. We can't not, unless you've got some incest going on. We come from different families. It's like we were raised differently. We got different values that have been dumped in us before we even had any awareness of what values were, and they sneak out when we have kids. That's the way it works. And so they they will, and they're different. What they think is acceptable is going to be different to what you think is acceptable, and we need to be aware of the needs that children have, of information that we can provide about how they might be able to improve their parenting or improve, understanding of their children's needs. But bottom line, they've got to live with the decisions they make. So one of the most sincere forms of respect is actually listening to what another has to say, and valuing it. So we want to find out what's important to them. So respect is one of those words that have different meanings for different people. So the meaning that I'm using when I use respect is due regard for the feelings, wishes and rights of others. Now, some people use respect in a completely different manner. They use it in respect for my rights, feelings and wishes. And so, what do you think about that definition? Is that your understanding of respect? Is that, does yours differ?
No, it's it covers off on what I would think as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in the etymology. I never say this word. Etymology of words.
Yeah.
This is really just me being a bit of a smart ass, really.
Yeah.
This definition has nothing to do with what you say, really,
No.
because what you've got here is, I think, exactly what is. I agree with that definition for mediation. This is the technical definition. Found that respect, the Latin is Latin. Re means again. I can repeat.
Yeah.
Means again. And spect means like from spectacle. It means look.
Yeah.
Or see. So technically, Latin, it means to look upon favorably again. But like you said, it has different meanings for different contexts.
Yeah. So respect your elders. You know,
Yeah, right.
that doesn't fit this context.
No, it's
And this
different.
is something that you'll come up with a lot. You know, respect your, you know, or the husband expects respect.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
because that's, you know, I go out and slave and bring in all the money, and where's the respect? You know, where's the respect for that?
Absolutely right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's the context, isn't it?
It really is. So it's a word that, but it's also a really important word in human dynamics. So if this becomes, so any of these values laden words that come up in the mediation, we need to try and get people's meaning for them. You know, when you talk about respect, what is it that mean? You know, what do you mean by that? How do you know that you're getting respected? You know, those sort of things. You know, so what are their rules around it? What is their reality strategy to know? How, you know, how do you know when you're being respected, or how do you know when you're being disrespected? And those can really help to open up understanding of what's going on. So, you know, if we're respecting other people in the, you know, the parties in the mediation, in this context is, you know, we're giving due regard for their feelings, wishes and rights of both parties. And generally they're not doing that, at least not in the beginning. And it means upholding the rights of others. And that, you know, so respecting those individual differences is not allowing a weaker person to be overrun by someone stronger. It's allowing the weaker person to sort of start. You know, when we transition from the opening statements and forming the agendas through the exploration, you know, that's allowing them a little bit of air. So, you know, some of the respect things are, we ask them what do they want to achieve, you know, so that final question that you often might ask in the opening statements with the parties, you know, so what would you like to achieve today in the mediation? So they've just given you a whole pile of blah, 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 blah. Okay, that's great. A bit of a summary. So, look, you know, so what would you know, what do you hope to achieve today? Oh, you know, that'll set them back a little bit, and that'll tell you a little bit more about what's important to them, hopefully. You know, showing respect is empathy and acknowledging feeling, establishing and maintaining the ground rules, so creating a safe place for people to talk. You know, don't humiliate or embarrass. So particularly if people have got that respect means I'm not embarrassed meaning. You want to make sure that anything that's too challenging for them is, you know, you talk about it in private sessions, don't make them lose face. If that's something that's coming up, that you can see that pride or whatever term you want to use is really important to them, you need to be mindful of that. And cultural differences. So, you know, even things like shaking hands, is that appropriate in the culture? You know, like Matt, you wouldn't offer to shake a hand of a Muslim woman, you know, unless she puts her hand out first, because, you know, she mightn't be, you don't know. But often, you know, let the people put the cues. I don't shake hands unless someone puts their hand out, and then I'll offer to shake hands with the other person. You know, so kind of I'll generally do the air hostessy thing. I'll whoosh them. Whooshing works well. So, you know, you got even those little things could be really disruptive to the start of the mediation if you do something that's culturally inappropriate for someone who's traditional. You know, so don't assume that you know what people want. Ask them. You know, if you think you know what they want, then you're making assumptions, because you don't, unless you've asked them or they've told you. How are you going to know? You know, respect feelings. So it's kind of tempting. We'll just ignore them until they stop, but that's not very respectful. So don't allow venting, which is, you know, I don't think that we should be allowing very much venting in mediation. Other people have different ideas, and so you're going to need to work out where your equilibrium is. But allowing frightening displays of emotion, sarcasm, passive-aggressive behaviour, emotional manipulation, all of those things, they don't belong in mediation. They're going to push, you know, one or both of them probably into, you know, fully into right brain. They won't be able to problem solve. They're going to be anxious. They're, you know, it's really not conducive. Call a break, end the session. You know, if someone's just flooding and they can't cope anymore, just, you know, cut it short. It doesn't matter. You know, you can reconvene later. You know, you don't have to hold someone there for their 3 hours or their 4 hours or whatever it is you've scheduled. You know, so, but don't, you know, don't shame them or embarrass them. So try and manage those things gently. You know, so that we don't, and don't apply the golden rule, which is treat other people the way you want to be treated. You need to upgrade to platinum, which is treat other people the way they want to be treated. And the only way to do that is to ask them. So, yeah, we're upgrading to platinum or gold, diamond, or whatever's the best rule. So reframing. So I know you've all got this skill, but you know, it's basically from the you know, we can't, whatever this misquote of Albert Einstein is, we can't solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. So unless we reframe, unless we get people looking at things from different perspectives, they're going to be stuck where they were. You know, like, this is another really important part of what we're doing in the mediation. We're, you know, unless this happens, you know, they'll come out of it saying, "Oh, I knew it wasn't going to do anything." You know, it's, you know, we need to get them being able to see from each other's perspective or from a third perspective, something they haven't thought of. We've got to help improve them to be more flexible in their thinking, because, you know, one of the features of being in conflict is it causes rigidity. You know, people get defensive and they get stuck in you know, the solution, which, you know, they think and the other person doesn't agree. Yeah. But it's, you know, it's often only something that you can do if you're not part of the problem, because the people that are caught up in it just can't do that because they're in it. It's you know, it's self-perpetuating. So it's basically, it's viewing events, ideas, concepts, emotions to find, in this case, we're talking about a more positive alternative or way of, so, you know, we need to reframe the question. Instead of alleviating poverty, we need to be creating wealth. For me, there's all the stuff around family violence. You know, stop family violence. No, let's work on supporting family peace and collaboration and respect in family homes. That's what we want. You know, not just stopping violence. It's just, yeah, you know, it's, yeah, because let's just have everyone apathetic and not hitting each other or saying nasty things. No, you know, that's not good enough. That's no goal. So part of your reframing is, you know, right from the beginning, what do you want to achieve? You know, what would that look like? You know, it's part of the cognitive therapy and cognitive. We're not using it to fix people. We're rather using it to help people to see from other perspectives. So, you know, where do you want to be in 5 years? So we can blow out the time frame. So it's you know, all sorts of different ways of looking at things. So we're not wanting to do that during the opening statements. It's really when we're seeing people getting stuck and positional. That's when you want to be really pulling out your reframes. So in your opening statements, you're just wanting to get, you know, what are they saying? We're using summaries, we're using paraphrasing, those sort of things that are more neutral. Whereas reframing, we are actually, you know, we're saying, I want you to look at things differently. That's what a reframe is. Ultimately, that's its purpose. So, you know, we can challenge gently. So if someone's saying using overgeneralizing, so always or never, you know, so always, are there any times when that doesn't happen? You know, if they're having difficulty considering other perspectives. Okay, so how do you think that, you know, Tom's look, you know, how do you think Tom would see that? Or, you know, look, asking them to think about it from the other person's point of view. That can be really difficult for people because they don't want to, because they don't want to acknowledge anything positive on their side. But temporal, so, you know, longer term, here and now. So if they're catastrophizing into the future, bring them back shorter. If they're too caught up in now, what's the future look like? Bigger picture, if they're looking at too much detail. So whatever they're doing, we kind of want to do the opposite. It's the easiest reframe. You know, so if they're just big picture, then we want a reality test and, you know, well, how does that work? What's the practical, you know, what would that look like? What's the next step? You know, that go down to the detail. If they're just focusing on the problems, then we switch them to focusing on the desirable future. So those are just a few. Reframing is a massive, massive area in and of itself. But easiest way is just, you know, if they look a bit stuck, think about what is it that they're doing. I'll ask them to do the opposite. That works for me. That'll shift. That'll shift something. So use it when they appear stuck. You know, you don't need to be doing reframes if they're talking well and productively. Use it to change focus. So if they're getting stuck in the past, switch them to the future. You know, use it to break through stereotyping. So if you think that they're overgeneralizing or distorting reality, you know, you can ask them to look at things from a different perspective. So, you know, we don't want to overuse them, but they are, you know, they are, and you can use them as well to bring in other people. So, you know, if your children were here, what do you think they would say? Can be something. You know, what do you think they'd say about this solution that you're coming up with? Not so much about what do they say they want, you know, because they're both, you know, that's going to just polarize people. But, you know, if they're moving along but they're getting a bit stuck, you know, that can be used. So, but you don't use them to push your agenda. I keep rehashing this because it's a danger we can fall into. Don't use them if it's productive. You don't need to. Use paraphrasing and summarising for clarity. Don't use them therapeutically, Matt, and others that are therapists. Just remember what hat you got on when you're mediating. And don't reframe their feelings, and particularly during opening statement, you know. Now, you're not really, you know, I want you to think about if you weren't feeling upset. Well, I suppose you could if you had enough rapport, but, you know, generally we're probably not going to in this context. Any comments or thoughts about reframes? They can be a huge amount of fun. Because it's, yeah, when you get a really good reframe in, they sort of, what? You say, wow, good one. Respectful interruption. It's necessary for time management. Ultimately, that's part of our job. You know, we have a certain amount of time. If we allow one or the other to hijack or just get caught up and dominate the time, sometimes you'll get someone who's trying to manipulate or control the time, or just someone who talks too much. That will try it. It also, we need to interrupt sometimes if someone's got poor emotional control. We need to interrupt their escalation. So we need to be mindful of that. it shows that you're in control and can enforce the ground rules, so it keeps it safe and shows them you can keep them safe. People will often test you at the beginning just to see whether or not what you said is true. So it's being able to interrupt people without interrupting the creative flow is kind of what you want to do. Yeah, so it's being so it's how do we interrupt without being disrespectful? And if we think about that concept that we have of respect of considering that person's needs, ideas and thoughts are important, we want to interrupt non-productive, circular or just not going anywhere conversation without making them feel like they're not important or we don't respect them. So do pre-frame. So that's right in the beginning in your opening statements. It's really helpful to say, look, part of my job is to keep things on track, and so I may have to interrupt you. I apologise. Please don't think that means I don't, what you're saying is not important. It's just that's part of my job. Is that okay? If you get that permission, that's going to mean that you've established what it means. When you interrupt, it means that you're just trying to manage the time. It doesn't mean that what they're saying is rubbish or you don't like them. Otherwise, they might think that. Do use non-verbal interruptions when you can. So, you might be able to just redirect them, use your agenda. If they're stuck on an issue, so if they start going around in circles, say, look, what I'm going to suggest is that we'll leave that for a moment. We do a little bit of a summary. So it seems to me that this is what you're thinking and that's what you're thinking. What I'd like to do is shelve that for a moment and just let's have a look at the next item on the agenda, and we can come back to that. You can interrupt with humour, or something. Some acknowledgement. Often people will continue going over and over something because they don't feel acknowledged. So if someone keeps coming back to something, we know that it's probably because they don't think they were heard. And so, we need to, oh, look at the time. No, we need to stop. Why didn't you interrupt me, people?
No,
So I think we're nearly done. We are number 10.
Very
Transitionals.
Very interesting. That's why.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
And transition statements. So, those are the things of, this is what we're going to do next. Gives them a reminder, keeps them feeling like they know where they're at, helps them to have some framework. This one, Phil Schiller, there may be a little pain in every transition, but we can't let it stop us from making it. If we did, we'd never make any progress at all. Don't know that he was referring to mediation, but it's it's appropriate for us. So yeah, your job is to stick to the process because it works, and guide them hopefully towards a an effective solution. So there's your process, boom, 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 boom. And it's all your steps, and you want to do them cleanly. So, transition from one end, use your agenda, go from one to the next if they don't do it themselves. When you've done enough exploration, you're pretty confident everyone's heard each other and understand, move them on to option generation. So, okay, look, sounds like we've got a pretty good understanding of both of your perspectives. So what do you think you could do? What are some options you've got available to you? That's a transition that we've just moved them from there. Otherwise, they're going to keep going round in circles. Private sessions. Sometimes they'll call them. Usually, you will to say, look, I think once again, negotiation. So, what do you propose? So, we've looked at some of the options. Who'd like to make a proposal? What do you recommend? So, and then, documenting, okay, how would you like me to write that down? How do you, and then, okay, look, we've only got a couple of minutes left. So what I want to do is we're going to need to close. How do you think it's gone? Do you think you're going to need another session? If, seeing how, how are you going to, what are you going to do if what you've come up with doesn't work? How, how are you going to resolve any disagreements or adjustments you need to make? Great. Okay. Fantastic job. You've done amazing work here today. Really, really great. What I'll do is I'll get an email out to both of you with this thing. Thank you very much. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. I'm tired now. So yeah, look, sometimes it depends on how you structure where you're working. You might go over a bit on time. I've got a bad habit of doing that, as you can see. But that's up to you. So so in skill transitions, don't allow the process to blend and kill transitions. So don't allow the agenda formation to turn into an exploration. It's really important to stick to the process, because if it's, it works. So, shut them down if they want to start getting into a discussion. Get your agenda out cleanly, get past that so that they can explore without, but you've got some structure to hold them to. And if they're people that are going to try and turn the agenda into a big discussion, they're probably going to be people that you do need that framework around to keep them on track. Don't tell them what to think. You control the process, they control the content. Don't make them feel foolish. Don't assume they'll remember what to do simply by saying, okay, we're now going to transition to exploration. Matt, you can go first. Well, what do I do? I don't know what to do. Oh, no one told me what to do. Then Matt, could you, the first item on the agenda that you reached, could you tell Erin, your perspective on that that item? Oh, okay, yeah, I can do that. Oh no, he doesn't. He says, no, I can't do that. It's too scary. And don't blame them for getting it wrong. Just redirect them. I think if you expect that they're going to have some troubles with things, then that means that you're not, they don't feel like you're upset because you didn't follow what you told them. Because so just coach them. Be a coach. So there you go. All you need to do is those things, and you got the process done and dusted. And even though we've got some other content in with parenting or with property, underneath it all, it's pretty much the same process. We're facilitating communication between people about these very specific issues that they've got in terms of their children or their property.
Can I make a little comment about the agenda?
You certainly can.
When you're discussing with them what sequence I'd like to do it in, use the words like, what order would you like to discuss them in, not what's important to you.
Yes. Yeah.
If you use what's important to you, what's important to both parties may be different. You're going to have World War III and you haven't even gotten out of the agenda.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, and you got, we've finally got an agenda at an hour in. No.
So use the word discuss, and if they sort of start disagreeing with each other, say, look, we've got all the time to cover them all. It's just so we've got some structure to the mediation. Which one should we start discussing first? And usually someone will go, I don't care.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's going to give you some good information about how they negotiate. Are they going to defer to each other? Are they going to try and win the agenda? It gives you a lot of information. So don't jump in and just say, oh well, what about this one first? Because sometimes the mediator gets uncomfortable with that process. of you know, just get it over with. No, let them negotiate. If they can't negotiate an agenda, for goodness sakes, where are we going to be? Yeah, we'll be in trouble. Exactly right. So yeah, so what was it? So remember what what the homework was? Pay attention to any judgmental language that may escape your lips.
Yeah.
Just for fun. I'm not actually going to ask you to have to report it back. But it's just, just be mindful. Mindfulness is actually a really surprising thing. My first experience with someone teaching me about mindfulness is the little thing I had to do was to pay attention to opening every door during the day. Just, just watch my hand, turn the knob, feel the knob, pay attention as I go through. I wasn't in a great place at the time, but I actually didn't appear to have gone through any doors the next day because I couldn't remember a single one. It was just like I was completely working on unconscious, just nah. Just not doing it. Yeah. You know that when you've driven somewhere and you get there and you think, I don't remember that drive. So for those couple of hours or whatever that we're in mediation, we've got to actually remember the drive.
And the worst mindfulness exercise you can do is to be mindful of how you walk, because then you walk like a robot.
Yeah.
You do, because you're going left foot forward, right foot forward, and everyone looks at you.
Yeah, it's quite surprising how much we do on autopilot. Really surprising. But so look, I hope that was helpful as a bit of a reminder and things. So we've got starting to get a few things. We've got some of the guys are doing interact consultations. So the first role play, Erin, because you're sort of just getting your way around, and is a it's a family law information and goal setting session basically that we use with the not-for-profit with Interact, and we're using it as an assessment task in the course to make sure that you're able to give family law information without giving advice. Because that's the really tricky and important distinction, because unlike standard mediators, as FDR practitioners, we do have obligations to give people information, about parenting plans, about duty of disclosure, about all sorts of, and about the system itself. So, so some of the guys are doing that Saturday morning. I'm going to be mentoring. So you don't have to come and do things on Saturday morning, but I'm just letting you know. And we're putting that so that link, that mentoring link in the course, we're going to be starting to use that to put down when role plays are on, so that you're able to sort of come along when you can. Most of them will be during the week, but also once you're up to the point where you're ready to be a role player, we coordinate and do those. So it's good.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm sorry I went so much over time, but enjoy the rest of your evening. Any comments or no? We're all finished and done.
That was amazing. Thank you. Brilliant.
Yeah, it's very useful.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Erin.
Okay. You're welcome.
See ya.
No
Bye.
worries. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.